The sun had turned her mind to dust 3 days ago, and now Caroline Rawlings walked in circles through the Nevada wasteland, her cracked lips moving in prayers she could not remember learning, while vultures traced lazy patterns overhead that mimicked her own meaningless path below. She had been traveling with a wagon train from Sacramento to Salt Lake City in the summer of 1878, a journey that promised a new beginning after the consumption had taken her husband and infant daughter within 6 months of each other. The grief had hollowed her out, left her a shell of 23 years that moved through the world without purpose or direction. When her aunt in Salt Lake City had written with an invitation to start fresh, Caroline had sold everything and bought passage with a reputable guide. But reputable men could still make fatal mistakes, and when the guide had chosen to take a shortcut through the Black Rock Desert to save time, he had led them straight into the territory of a band of outlaws who cared nothing for the lives of honest travelers. The attack had come at dawn. Caroline remembered the sound of gunfire, the screaming of horses, the way her hands had shaken as she climbed down from the wagon. A woman named Mrs. Henderson had grabbed her arm and hissed, "Run, girl, run while they're distracted," and Caroline had run. She had run without thinking, without looking back, her skirts clutched in her fists as she fled into the desert scrubland. She had run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and when she finally stopped and turned around, there was nothing behind her but emptiness. That had been 4 days ago, or maybe 5. Time had become slippery, unreliable. She had tried to retrace her steps, but everything looked the same: sagebrush and sand, rocks and sky. She walked in what she thought was a straight line, only to find herself back at the same twisted Joshua tree she had passed hours before. The sun wheeled overhead like a burning coin, and at night the cold came down like a punishment. She had no water, no food, no protection from the elements. Her traveling dress was torn and filthy, her boots were falling apart, and her skin was burned raw from the relentless sun. On the 4th day, she began to see things that were not there. Her daughter, Emma, toddling through the sagebrush with her arms outstretched. Her husband, James, standing on a distant ridge, beckoning her forward. She knew these visions were lies her dying brain told her, but she followed them anyway because there was nothing else to follow. Now, on what she distantly understood might be her last day alive, she stumbled forward with no destination in mind. Her tongue was swollen in her mouth, her vision narrowed to a tunnel, and every step required a monumental effort of will. She thought about lying down, about closing her eyes and letting the desert take her. At least then she would be with James and Emma again. At least then the pain would stop. She did not hear the horse approaching until it was nearly upon her. The sound of hoofbeats penetrated the fog in her mind, and she turned, squinting against the glare of the afternoon sun. A figure on horseback was moving toward her, dark against the brightness. Another hallucination, she thought. Another cruel trick of her failing mind. She sank to her knees in the sand and waited for the vision to dissolve. But it did not dissolve. The hoofbeats grew louder, and then a shadow fell across her, blessed and cool. A voice spoke, deep and concerned, though she could not make out the words. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her as she swayed. Something pressed against her lips, something hard and smooth, and then water was flowing into her mouth, precious and cold and real. She choked and coughed, and the hands withdrew the canteen briefly before offering it again. "Slow," the voice said, and this time she understood the word. "Drink slow, miss, or you'll be sick." She obeyed, taking small sips, and with each swallow the world came back into focus. The man kneeling before her was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, and his face was etched with worry as he studied her. "How long you been out here?" he asked. Caroline tried to answer, but her voice would not work. She held up 4 fingers, then hesitated and added a 5th. His jaw tightened. 5 days, Lord above. Can you stand?" She was not sure, but she nodded anyway. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to buckle. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, stood nearby, reins trailing in the sand. The man guided her toward the animal with careful patience. "Name's Gideon Everett," he said. "I've been tracking you for 2 days now. Saw your trail and knew someone was in trouble. You've been walking in circles, miss. Same patch of ground, over and over. 2 days." He had been following her for 2 days, this stranger who had saved her life. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, the first moisture they had produced in days. She tried again to speak, and this time managed a hoarse whisper. "Caroline Rawlings. Miss Rawlings." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm going to get you to safety, but we need to move now. Can you ride?" She nodded, though she was not certain. Gideon lifted her onto the saddle with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her steady, and she sagged against his chest, too exhausted to care about propriety. He urged the horse forward, and Caroline closed her eyes as the rocking gait carried her away from the place where she had nearly died. She drifted in and out of consciousness as they rode. Sometimes she woke to find the sun still high overhead, sometimes to darkness pricked with stars. Gideon offered her water at intervals, never too much at once, and spoke to her in a low, steady voice that kept her tethered to the world. He told her about the town where they were heading, a place called Lovelock, Nevada, where he worked as a ranch hand for a man named Samuel Pritchard. He told her about the land, about the Humboldt River that ran through the valley and made the desert bloom. His words painted pictures that Caroline clung to, imagining green grass and cool water and safety. When they finally reached Lovelock, night had fallen and Caroline was barely conscious. She had confused impressions of buildings, lamplight, voices calling out in surprise. Gideon carried her into a house, and a woman's face appeared above her, lined and kind. Hands undressed her, bathed her sunburned skin with cool water, dressed her in a soft nightgown. She was laid in a bed, a real bed with clean sheets and a pillow, and she sank into it like a stone into water. She slept for 2 days. When she finally woke, truly woke, she found herself in a small, neat bedroom with whitewashed walls and lace curtains. Sunlight streamed through the window, warm but not punishing. For a long moment she simply lay still, taking inventory of her body. Everything hurt, but it was the honest pain of healing, not the desperate agony of dying. Her lips were still cracked, her skin still tender, but she was alive. She was alive because a cowboy named Gideon Everett had found her trail and brought her water. The door opened, and the woman she dimly remembered appeared, carrying a tray. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that missed nothing. "You're awake," she said, and her voice held warm approval. "Good. I'm Martha Pritchard. My husband Samuel and I run the ranch outside town. Gideon brought you to us 3 nights ago. You were in a bad way, child." Caroline struggled to sit up, and Martha set down the tray to help her, arranging pillows behind her back. "Thank you," Caroline whispered. "You saved my life. Both of you, you and Mr. Everett. Gideon's the one who found you," Martha said. "Rode out tracking what he thought might be a lost calf and found your trail instead. Said he knew right away it was a person in trouble, the way the tracks wandered and doubled back. He's got an eye for that sort of thing. I need to thank him properly. You'll have your chance." He's been by twice a day to check on you, worried sick. Martha poured water from a pitcher into a glass and handed it to Caroline. Now, I want you to drink this slow, then try some broth. Your stomach's not ready for solid food yet. And while you eat, you can tell me what happened if you're up to it. So Caroline told her story, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence as the words loosened the knot of fear and grief in her chest. She told Martha about losing James and Emma, about the journey west, about the outlaw attack and her desperate flight into the desert. Martha listened without interrupting, her face grave, and when Caroline finished, she reached out and squeezed her hand. "You've had a hard road," she said quietly. "But you're safe now, and you're welcome to stay here as long as you need to recover. Longer if you've nowhere else to go." "I was traveling to Salt Lake City," Caroline said. "My aunt lives there, but I have no money now, no belongings. Everything was on the wagon." "We'll sort that out when you're stronger. For now, focus on healing." Martha stood, smoothing her apron. "I'll bring you some broth, and later, if you're feeling up to it, Gideon would like to visit. He'll be glad to see you awake." After Martha left, Caroline sipped the water and gazed out the window at the unfamiliar landscape. She could see buildings in the distance, the main street of Lovelock, and beyond that, the mountains rising against a brilliant blue sky. This was not where she had planned to be, but plans meant little when the desert tried to kill you. She was alive, and that was enough. That had to be enough. Martha returned with broth and bread softened in milk, and Caroline ate slowly, feeling strength seep back into her body with each spoonful. Afterward, she dozed again, and when she woke, the sun was lower in the sky and someone was knocking softly at the door. "Come in," she called, and Gideon Everett entered, hat in his hands. In the full light of the afternoon, Caroline could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. His hair was dark brown, curling slightly at his collar, and his eyes were the greenish-gray she remembered, framed by lines that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, and there was something in his expression, a combination of relief and worry that made Caroline's heart skip. "Miss Rawlings," he said, "it's good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to you." Caroline's voice was still hoarse, but growing stronger. "Mr. Everett, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You saved my life. Gideon, please." He moved closer, settling into the chair beside the bed with an easy grace. "And you don't need to thank me. I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Caroline said softly. "You tracked me for 2 days. You found me when I had given up hope. That's not something just anyone would do." A faint flush colored his tanned cheeks. "I'm a tracker by trade, among other things. Used to scout for the cavalry before I came here to work for Sam Pritchard. When I saw those tracks, saw how they wandered, I knew someone was in bad trouble. Couldn't leave you out there. Still, I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything." His eyes met hers, serious and intent. "I'm just glad I found you in time. Another day and—" He trailed off, shaking his head. They were both silent for a moment, acknowledging the nearness of death that had been averted. Then Caroline said, "Mrs. Pritchard told me about Lovelock. It seems like a good town." "It is. Small but growing. We've got a general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse. Most folks here are ranchers or miners, good people for the most part." He hesitated, then added, "You mentioned to Martha that you were heading to Salt Lake City. Do you still want to go?" Caroline considered the question. Her aunt's invitation had been genuine, she knew, but it had also been born of pity. Poor Caroline, who lost her husband and child, who has nothing left. The thought of arriving on her aunt's doorstep as a charity case made something in her recoil. "I don't know," she admitted. "I had nothing left in Sacramento but memories. Salt Lake City was supposed to be a fresh start, but now—" I don't know what I want anymore. Gideon nodded slowly. Well, you don't have to decide right away. Martha and Sam won't push you to leave before you're ready. And if you do decide to stay, even for a while, there might be work in town. I know the school teacher was looking for someone to help with the younger children, and the general store could probably use an extra hand. You've thought about this, Caroline said, surprised. I've had a few days to think, he admitted, while you were sleeping. I kept wondering what would happen to you once you woke up, whether you'd have anywhere to go. The concern in his voice touched something deep inside Caroline, something she had thought died with James. That's kind of you, she said quietly, kinder than I deserve. Why would you say that? Because I ran. When the outlaws attacked, I ran and left the others behind. I don't even know if any of them survived. I was a coward. Gideon leaned forward, his expression fierce. You were not a coward. You survived. That takes its own kind of courage, Miss Rawlings. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you different. The intensity in his voice, the absolute conviction, made Caroline's eyes sting with tears. I keep thinking about Mrs. Henderson, she whispered. She told me to run. She saved me, and I don't know what happened to her. I can send word to the marshal, see if there's been any news about the attack. If there were survivors, they might have made it to one of the towns along the route. He reached out, then seemed to think better of it and withdrew his hand. You did what you had to do to live. There's no shame in that. Caroline wiped her eyes, embarrassed by her tears. I'm sorry, I don't usually fall apart like this. You've been through hell. You're allowed to fall apart. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. I should let you rest. But I'll be back tomorrow if that's all right. And if you need anything at all, you just tell Martha and she'll send word to me. Thank you, Gideon. The name felt natural on her tongue, intimate in a way that surprised her. For everything. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. You're welcome, Caroline. After he left, Caroline lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. She had known the man for less than a week, had been conscious for only a handful of hours, and yet something about him had reached past her grief and exhaustion to touch the part of her that still wanted to live. It was too soon, too fast, and she felt guilty for even noticing his kindness as anything more than simple human decency. James had been dead only a year, Emma even less. How could she even think about another man when their graves were still fresh? But James would not want her to die in the desert, and he would not want her to bury herself alive in grief. He had loved her too much for that. The thought was both comforting and painful, and Caroline turned her face into the pillow and wept for everything she had lost, and everything that might still be possible. Over the next week, Caroline regained her strength slowly. Martha proved to be a patient and attentive nurse, feeding her nourishing meals and helping her walk short distances around the room to rebuild her stamina. Samuel Pritchard, a gruff but kind man in his 50s, stopped by once to assure her that she was welcome in his home for as long as she needed. And Gideon came every day, sometimes twice, always bringing something, a handful of wildflowers, a book to help pass the time, a smooth stone from the river that he said was good luck. They talked during those visits, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Gideon told her about his childhood in Missouri, about how his parents had died of cholera when he was 16 and he had headed west to make his own way. He had worked as a scout, a guide, a ranch hand, drifting from place to place until he landed in Lovelock and found something like home. Caroline told him about her life in Sacramento, about James's work as a carpenter, about Emma's bright laugh and the way she had loved to chase butterflies. It hurt to talk about them, but it also felt like honoring their memory, and Gideon listened with a quiet attention that made her feel heard in a way she had not felt in months. By the end of the week, Martha declared Caroline well enough to leave the bedroom, and she ventured into the main house, a comfortable ranch-style building with a large kitchen and a sitting room filled with well-worn furniture. Martha and Samuel treated her like a daughter, insisting she sit while they served her meals, asking her opinion on household matters as if she belonged there. It was strange and wonderful to feel part of a family again, even if it was not her own. Gideon came by one evening and found her sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. He climbed the steps and settled into the chair beside her, stretching out his long legs with a sigh. "Martha says you're almost back to full strength. I feel human again, at least." Caroline glanced at him, noting the tired lines around his eyes. "Long day, long week. We've been moving the cattle to summer pasture. Hot, dusty work." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "But it's done now for a few days at least. You work hard." "So does everyone out here. It's the only way to survive." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Have you thought any more about what you want to do, stay or go?" Caroline had thought about little else. "I think I want to stay," she said slowly, "at least for a while. I'm not ready to face my aunt yet, to explain what happened, and Lovelock feels peaceful, safe. I'm glad." The simple words carried a weight of feeling that made Caroline's heart beat faster. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Were you?" "Yes." He held her gaze, unflinching. "I know it's too soon and I don't want to presume, but I'd like to get to know you better, Caroline, if you'd allow it." It was too soon, too fast, but Caroline found herself nodding anyway, a warmth spreading through her chest that she had not felt in a long, long time. "I'd like that too." They sat together in companionable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains and the stars began to appear, and Caroline thought that maybe, just maybe, the desert had not been the end of her story. Maybe it had been the beginning of something new. The next morning, Martha took Caroline into town to introduce her to the community and inquire about work. Lovelock was smaller than Caroline had expected, just a handful of streets clustered around the main thoroughfare, but it had a bustling, energetic feel. Miners and ranchers rubbed shoulders in front of the general store, women gossiped outside the church, and children played in the dusty street. Martha seemed to know everyone, and she made sure to present Caroline to each person they met, explaining that she was a friend who would be staying in town for a while. The school teacher, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Abigail Fletcher, was delighted to hear that Caroline was looking for work. "I've been struggling with the younger ones," she confessed as they stood in the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks. "There are too many children and not enough hours in the day. If you could take charge of the beginners, teaching them their letters and numbers, it would be a tremendous help. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work." Caroline accepted immediately, grateful for the chance to be useful. They agreed that she would start the following Monday, giving her a few more days to fully recover. As they left the schoolhouse, Martha squeezed her arm. "You're going to do well here," she said warmly. "I can feel it." True to his word, Gideon continued to visit, and as the days passed, those visits became the highlight of Caroline's existence. He would stop by after work, smelling of horses and leather, and they would walk along the river or sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. He made her laugh with stories about ornery cattle and the ranch hands' antics. She told him about the children she would soon be teaching, her nervousness about doing a good job. He assured her she would be wonderful, and his confidence in her became a foundation she could build on. One evening, about 3 weeks after he had found her in the desert, Gideon arrived with a package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly shy. Caroline unwrapped it carefully and found a dress inside, simple but well made in a soft blue cotton that matched her eyes. "Gideon, I can't accept this," she protested, even as she ran her fingers over the fabric in wonder. "It's too much." "It's not too much. You lost everything in the desert, Caroline. You need more than one borrowed dress." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson at the general store helped me pick it out. She said it would suit you. If it doesn't fit or you don't like it, we can exchange it. It's beautiful." Caroline looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Thank you. You've done so much for me already. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "I don't want repayment." His voice was rough, earnest. "I just want you to be happy." The sincerity in his words made Caroline's breath catch. They stood close together in the fading light, and she saw the longing in his eyes, felt an answering pull in her own heart. It would be so easy to close the distance between them, to let herself fall into this connection that was growing stronger every day. But fear held her back. Fear of betraying James's memory, fear of being hurt again, fear of moving too fast and ruining something precious. Gideon seemed to sense her hesitation. He stepped back, giving her space. "I should go. Early start tomorrow." "Gideon, wait." Caroline set the dress aside and reached for his hand, a bold gesture that surprised them both. "Thank you. For the dress, for everything. You've been so kind to me." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "You make it easy," he said softly. "Being kind to you." After he left, Caroline held the dress up to herself and studied her reflection in the small mirror. The blue did suit her, brought out the color of her eyes and made her skin glow. She looked like a woman coming back to life, and maybe that was exactly what she was. Caroline started teaching the following Monday, and she discovered that she loved it. The children were eager and bright, even the ones who struggled with their letters, and she found joy in watching their faces light up when they mastered a new skill. Mrs. Fletcher was generous with her praise, and the parents were grateful for the extra attention their children received. Caroline fell into a routine, teaching during the day, helping Martha with household chores in the afternoon, and spending her evenings with Gideon. As summer deepened into August, their relationship deepened as well. They moved beyond polite conversation into something more intimate, sharing fears and dreams, disappointments and hopes. Gideon told her about a woman he had courted back in Missouri, a girl named Sarah who had broken his heart by marrying his best friend. Caroline told him about the dark months after Emma died, when she had not wanted to live anymore. They were both wounded people, scarred by loss, and they recognized that pain in each other without needing to explain it. One Saturday, Gideon borrowed a wagon from the ranch and took Caroline on a picnic to a spot he loved along the Humboldt River. They spread a blanket under the shade of cottonwood trees and ate the lunch Martha had packed, cold chicken and biscuits and apple pie. The river murmured past them and birds sang in the branches overhead. It was peaceful, perfect, and Caroline felt something in her chest loosen and expand. "This is beautiful," she said, watching the sunlight dance on the water. "Thank you for bringing me here. I wanted to share it with you." Gideon was lying on his side, propped up on one elbow, watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Caroline, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it's too soon, and I know you're still grieving, and I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for. But I can't keep pretending this is just friendship. It's more than that, at least for me. And I needed you to know." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "Gideon, you don't have to say anything back," he said quickly. "I just needed to be honest with you. If you need more time, I'll wait. If you decide you can't feel the same way, I'll accept that." But I couldn't keep it inside anymore. Caroline reached out and cupped his face in her hand, feeling the roughness of his stubble, the warmth of his skin. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I already lost everyone I loved once. I don't think I could survive losing someone again." Gideon covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek. "Life doesn't come with guarantees, Caroline. I can't promise I'll never die or that nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that I'll love you for as long as I'm breathing. And I'll do everything in my power to make you happy." "That's enough," Caroline said, and she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a tentative kiss at first, soft and questioning, but it quickly deepened into something more passionate. Gideon's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Caroline melted into him, feeling safe and desired and alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his and smiled. "I love you," she said again, testing the words, finding them true. "I love you too." He kissed her again, gentler this time, reverent. "I'm going to marry you, Caroline Rawlings, if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal?" "Not yet. But it will be, once I've saved up enough for a proper ring and gotten your permission from Sam and Martha." He grinned, looking young and hopeful. "I want to do this right." Caroline laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'll hold you to that, Gideon Everett." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking and kissing and planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. When they returned to the ranch that evening, Martha took one look at their glowing faces and smiled knowingly. "I take it you two had a good day," she said mildly. "The best," Gideon confirmed, and the happiness in his voice made Martha's smile widen. Over the next few months, their courtship became the talk of Lovelock, but in the kindest way. The townspeople had embraced Caroline as one of their own, and they were delighted to see her finding happiness with Gideon. He was well liked and respected, known for his honesty and work ethic, and everyone agreed they made a fine couple. Gideon was true to his word about doing things properly. In early October, he asked Samuel for permission to marry Caroline, and Samuel gave his blessing with gruff affection. "You're a good man, Gideon, and she's a good woman. You'll be happy together." The next evening, Gideon took Caroline back to their spot by the river, now dressed in autumn colors, and got down on one knee. The ring he offered was simple, a thin gold band with a small sapphire, but to Caroline it was more precious than diamonds. "Caroline Rawlings, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Yes," Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they held each other as the sun set and the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds in the vast Nevada desert. They were married in November, in the small church in Lovelock with the entire town in attendance. Caroline wore a new dress that Martha had helped her sew, ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Gideon wore his best suit, brushed and pressed within an inch of its life, and when he saw Caroline walking toward him down the aisle, his face lit up with such pure joy that several women in the congregation began to cry. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the way two people could become stronger together than they ever were apart. When it came time for vows, Gideon's voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you for all the days of my life. I promise to be the man you deserve, to work hard and provide for our family, and to never take for granted the gift of your love." Caroline's voice shook as she made her own promises. "I promise to love you with all my heart, to stand by your side through good times and bad, to build a home with you filled with laughter and joy. You saved my life, Gideon, and I will spend the rest of my days thanking God that you found me." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her with such tenderness that Caroline felt her heart might burst. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, and the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. Martha had outdone herself with the cooking, and the townspeople had contributed dishes of their own. There was music and dancing, and Caroline found herself swept from one partner to another, as the men of Lovelock took turns dancing with the bride. But her eyes kept returning to Gideon, who watched her with a possessive pride that made her blush. When they finally escaped the celebration and retired to the small house Gideon had rented in town, a 2-room cabin that would be their first home, they were both giddy with happiness and exhaustion. Gideon carried her over the threshold, and they stood together in the lamplight, suddenly shy. "Hello, Mrs. Everett," Gideon said softly. "Hello, husband." Caroline reached up and touched his face, still marveling that this was real, that she was allowed to touch him whenever she wanted. "I love you. I love you too." He kissed her, slow and deep, and then he lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, where they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and complete. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Caroline traced patterns on Gideon's chest and thought about the strange path that had led her here. If the wagon train had not been attacked, if she had not fled into the desert, if Gideon had not found her trail, her life would have been completely different. She might be in Salt Lake City now, living a half-life of grief and regret. Instead, she was here, in the arms of a man who loved her, with a future full of possibility stretching out before them. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, his voice drowsy. "How lucky I am," Caroline said. "How grateful." He tightened his arms around her. "I'm the lucky one. The day I found you was the best day of my life. Even though I was dying and delirious, even then." He kissed the top of her head. "I took one look at you and knew you were special. I just didn't know how special until I got to know you." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other, and when Caroline woke in the morning to find Gideon watching her with soft eyes, she felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what happiness felt like. This was what home felt like. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, and there were times when they struggled to make ends meet. Gideon's work at the ranch was seasonal, and during the slow winter months, he took odd jobs around town to supplement their income. Caroline continued teaching, and her small salary helped, but there were weeks when they ate beans and biscuits for every meal and wondered how they would pay the rent. But they never doubted their love for each other. When times were hard, they pulled together, supporting each other with words and actions. Gideon would come home exhausted from a long day of mending fences or breaking horses, and Caroline would have dinner waiting and a warm smile. Caroline would spend hours grading papers by lamplight, and Gideon would sit beside her, reading aloud from a book to keep her company. They were partners in every sense of the word, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. In the spring of 1879, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. She told Gideon one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, and then he let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We're going to be parents." Caroline's joy was tempered by fear. She could not help but remember Emma, the way she had lost her so suddenly to illness. What if something went wrong with this pregnancy? What if the baby did not survive? What if she did not survive? The fears crowded her mind, making it hard to breathe, and Gideon seemed to sense her anxiety. He sat her down and took her hands in his. "I know you're scared," he said gently. "I'm scared too. But we can't let fear steal this joy from us. We have to trust that everything will be all right. What if it's not? Then we'll face it together like we face everything else." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You're strong, Caroline, stronger than you know. And I'll be with you every step of the way." His faith in her became her anchor. As her belly grew and the pregnancy progressed, Caroline allowed herself to hope, to dream about the baby they would have. Gideon was attentive and protective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer chores. He talked to the baby every night, his big hand splayed across her stomach, telling stories and making promises about the life they would have together. The baby was born in December, a few weeks before Christmas, after a long and difficult labor that left Caroline weak and shaking. But when the midwife placed the squalling infant in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, and Gideon, who had been pacing outside, burst into the room with tears streaming down his face. "A son," he whispered, staring at the tiny, red-faced baby with wonder. "We have a son." They named him James after Caroline's first husband, because Caroline wanted to honor his memory and Gideon agreed without hesitation. Little James was healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs and a hearty appetite. He had Gideon's green-gray eyes and Caroline's delicate features, and both parents were hopelessly besotted. The first few months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and endless feedings, but also with a joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. Caroline would watch Gideon cradle their son, his rough hands so gentle, and feel her heart overflow with love. This was her family, the family she had thought she would never have again. God had given her a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. As James grew, so did the Everett family's fortunes. Gideon was promoted to foreman at the ranch, a position that came with better pay and more respect. Caroline continued teaching, though she reduced her hours to spend more time with James. They saved carefully, planning for the future, and by the time James was 2, they had enough money to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of Lovelock. Gideon built their house himself, with help from Samuel and some of the other ranch hands. It was a simple structure, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well-made, and it was theirs. The day they moved in, Caroline stood in the doorway and wept with happiness. She had come to Nevada with nothing, expecting to die in the desert, and now she had a home, a husband, a child. She had everything that mattered. Over the next few years, their family continued to grow. A daughter was born in 1882, whom they named Martha after the woman who had nursed Caroline back to health. Martha was quieter than James, a thoughtful child with her mother's blue eyes and a sweet, gentle disposition. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel after Gideon's mentor and employer. Samuel was a wild, energetic boy who kept them all on their toes. Gideon proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, stern when necessary but never harsh. He taught his children to ride, to track, to respect the land and the animals that lived on it. Caroline taught them their letters and numbers, read them stories, and filled their home with warmth and laughter. They were not rich, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. As the children grew, so did Lovelock. The town expanded, new businesses opened, and the population swelled with miners and ranchers drawn by the promise of prosperity. The Everetts became pillars of the community, respected and well-liked. Gideon served on the town council. Caroline continued teaching, and their home was always open to neighbors in need. Through it all, their love remained the foundation of their lives. They still stole moments together, walks by the river, or quiet evenings on the porch after the children were asleep. Gideon still looked at Caroline with the same wonder he had on their wedding day, and she still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. The years had added gray to their hair and lines to their faces, but they had also deepened their connection, turned passion into something richer and more enduring. One evening in the summer of 1890, when James was 10, Martha 8, and Samuel 6, the family sat together on the porch watching the sun set. The children were tired from a day of playing, leaning against their parents with heavy eyes. Gideon had his arm around Caroline, and she rested her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. "Tell us the story again," James said sleepily. "About how you found Mama in the desert." It was a story they had heard many times, but they never tired of it. Gideon exchanged a glance with Caroline, and she nodded, smiling. So he told them once more about tracking a trail through the desert, about finding a woman wandering in circles, about bringing her water and saving her life. He told them how he had fallen in love with her, how she had agreed to marry him, how they had built this life together. "And then we had you," Gideon finished, ruffling James's hair. "And you, and you." He touched Martha and Samuel in turn, "and we lived happily ever after." "Like a fairy tale," Martha said with a sigh. "Better than a fairy tale," Caroline corrected gently, "because it's real." After the children were asleep, Gideon and Caroline lingered on the porch, holding hands in the darkness. "Do you ever think about that day?" Gideon asked. "The day I found you." "All the time," Caroline admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying and how different my life would be if you hadn't found me. It feels like a miracle." "It was a miracle." Gideon brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "The best thing that ever happened to me." "You saved me," Caroline said softly. "In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Gideon corrected. "I was drifting before I met you, Caroline. I had work, friends, a place to live, but I didn't have a purpose. You gave me that, you and the children. You made my life mean something." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Caroline thought about the girl she had been, broken and grieving, stumbling through the desert toward death. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew what it meant to survive, to love, to build a life worth living. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by small triumphs and occasional sorrows. James grew into a strong, responsible young man who wanted to be a rancher like his father. Martha developed a love of learning and talked about becoming a teacher like her mother. Samuel remained wild and adventurous, always getting into scrapes but with a good heart underneath. In 1895, when Caroline was 40 and Gideon was 44, they celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. The children were old enough now to mostly fend for themselves, and Gideon and Caroline had stolen a rare evening alone. Over roast chicken and potatoes, they reminisced about their years together, the struggles and the joys, the way their love had grown and evolved. "If you could go back," Gideon said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "If you could change what happened, avoid the attack and go straight to Salt Lake City like you planned, would you?" Caroline considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "As terrible as it was, as much as I suffered, that experience brought me to you. And I wouldn't trade our life together for anything. Even though you lost so much time being lost in the desert, especially because of that, it taught me what really matters, not things, not plans, but people, love, family." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me a second chance at happiness, Gideon. You gave me a reason to live again." "You gave me the same," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Caroline, more now than the day I married you. I love you too." She stood and moved around the table to sit in his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for bringing me water. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life." He kissed her, long and deep, and for a moment they were young again, two people falling in love by a desert river. Then they heard a crash from upstairs and Samuel's voice calling, "It wasn't me." And they broke apart, laughing. "Our beautiful, chaotic life," Gideon amended, and Caroline could not disagree. As the turn of the century approached, the Everett family remained a fixture in Lovelock. James, now 20, had started working full-time at the Pritchard Ranch and was courting a nice girl from town. Martha, at 18, had taken a position as the new schoolteacher, following in her mother's footsteps. Samuel, at 16, was still finding his way, but he had a gift with horses that suggested a future as a trainer or breeder. Caroline and Gideon watched their children grow with pride and a touch of melancholy. The house that had once been filled with noise and chaos was quieter now, and they found themselves with more time alone together. They took advantage of it, traveling to nearby towns, visiting friends, enjoying the freedom that came with an emptying nest. On a warm evening in June of 1900, Gideon surprised Caroline with a picnic at their spot by the Humboldt River, the place where he had first told her he loved her 22 years ago. The cottonwood trees had grown taller, the river had changed its course slightly, but the peace and beauty of the place remained the same. They spread a blanket and unpacked the food, and as they ate, Gideon pulled out a worn piece of paper. "I found this the other day," he said, handing it to Caroline. "Do you remember? It was the letter from her aunt in Salt Lake City, the one that had prompted Caroline's journey west. She had kept it all these years, tucked in a drawer, a reminder of the path not taken." She read it again now, the neat handwriting offering comfort and a fresh start, and felt a pang for the woman who had written it. "I never did write to her," Caroline said. "I meant to, but life got busy and I was afraid she would be angry that I never arrived." "It's not too late," Gideon said. "You could write to her now, tell her what happened, introduce her to your family." Caroline thought about it, then shook her head. "No, that part of my life is over. My family is here with you and the children. That's all I need. No regrets, not a single one." She leaned over and kissed him. "You are the best decision I ever made, Gideon Everett, even if you did make the decision for me by saving my life." He laughed. "I couldn't very well leave you to die, could I?" "Some men would have," Caroline said seriously. "Some men would have seen the trouble I was in and ridden on by. But you didn't. You followed my trail for days, and you brought me water, and you gave me a future. I've never forgotten that, and I never will." "I did it because I saw someone who needed help," Gideon said. "But I stayed because I saw someone worth loving." "You were so brave, Caroline, even when you were at your lowest. You fought to survive, and when you woke up, you didn't give up. You built a new life from nothing. That takes courage." "We built it together," Caroline corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you." They watched the sun set over the river, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, and Caroline felt a deep, abiding gratitude for the life she had been given. She thought about the scared, grieving woman who had fled into the desert, and she wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that she would find love again, that she would have children again, that she would be happy again. But maybe that woman had known, deep down. Maybe some part of her had kept walking, kept fighting, because she believed that somewhere, somehow, there was a reason to keep living. And she had been right. In 1905, James married his sweetheart, a girl named Lucy, and they gave Gideon and Caroline their first grandchild, a boy they named Gideon after his grandfather. Holding the baby for the first time, Gideon wept openly, overcome by the knowledge that his legacy would continue, that his name would be passed down to another generation. Caroline cried too, remembering the baby she had lost so many years ago, but her tears were bittersweet. She had grieved Emma for so long, but now she could look at her grandchild and feel joy without the shadow of that old pain. Martha married a few years later, a schoolteacher from a neighboring town, and they moved to Carson City, where Martha opened her own school. Samuel, ever the wild one, joined the army and was stationed out west, sending letters full of adventure and mischief. The house was truly empty now, but Gideon and Caroline did not mind. They had each other, and after more than 30 years of marriage, that was still enough. They grew old together, their bodies slowing and their hair turning white, but their love remained constant. Gideon still brought Caroline flowers, and she still made his favorite meals. They still held hands on evening walks, still kissed goodnight before sleep. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper, a love that was woven into the fabric of their daily lives. In the spring of 1912, Caroline fell ill with pneumonia. She was 57, and the illness hit her hard, leaving her weak and bedridden. Gideon refused to leave her side, sitting by her bed day and night, bathing her forehead with cool water, coaxing her to eat and drink. The children came home, gathering around their mother with worry and love, but Caroline rallied. She fought the illness with the same determination she had shown in the desert all those years ago, and slowly, gradually, she recovered. When she was strong enough to sit up, Gideon helped her out to the porch, wrapping her in blankets and settling her in a chair. "You scared me," he said, his voice unsteady. "I thought I was going to lose you." "Not yet," Caroline said, squeezing his hand. "I'm not ready to leave you yet." "Good, because I need you, Caroline. I've needed you every day since I found you in that desert, and I'll need you every day until I die. I need you too." She looked at him, this man who had saved her life and then filled it with love and meaning, and felt her heart swell. "You're my hero, Gideon Everett. You always have been." "You're my hero too," he said, leaning over to kiss her. "The bravest woman I've ever known." Caroline recovered fully, and they had several more good years together. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and the party lasted long into the night. Standing in the yard of the home they had built together, watching their family laugh and dance, Caroline felt a profound sense of peace. This was what she had survived for. This was what her suffering had earned her. In 1923, when Caroline was 68 and Gideon was 72, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. Caroline woke to find him beside her, still and cold, and she knew immediately that he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that doubled her over, but underneath it was gratitude. They had been given 45 years together, far more than many couples received. They had loved deeply, lived fully, and built something lasting. At his funeral, Caroline stood before the gathered crowd and spoke about the man she had loved. She told the story one more time, about wandering lost in the desert, about the cowboy who found her trail and brought her water. She spoke about his kindness, his strength, his unwavering love. And she thanked God for the day Gideon Everett had tracked her through the desert and saved her life, because that day had changed everything. "He gave me a future when I had none," she said, her voice breaking. "He gave me love when I thought I would never love again. He gave me a family, a home, a reason to live, and I will be grateful to him for the rest of my days." She lived for another 12 years, long enough to see her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She remained active in the community, teaching part-time until her health no longer allowed it, and she was a beloved figure in Lovelock, known for her warmth and wisdom. But everyone could see that part of her had died with Gideon, that she was waiting patiently to join him. On a clear autumn day in 1935, Caroline Rawlings Everett passed away at the age of 80, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried next to Gideon in the Lovelock Cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that whispered in the wind. Her headstone bore a simple inscription: "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she was lost, and she was found." The story of Caroline and Gideon became legend in Lovelock, passed down through generations as an example of true love and second chances. People would point out the house they had built, the school where Caroline had taught, the ranch where Gideon had worked. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, couples would walk to the spot by the Humboldt River where Gideon had first told Caroline he loved her, and they would sit beneath the cottonwood trees and dream of a love as enduring as theirs, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the suffering, not the loss, not the hardships they had faced. What mattered was that a cowboy had found a woman's trail in the desert and brought her water, and from that single act of kindness had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth believing in. It was a story that proved that even in the hardest times, in the most desperate circumstances, hope could survive. Love could survive. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, someone would find you when you were lost and bring you home.